Um, Broadly, India has had huge changes, and like most unicorn countries, jumps technology and cultural width in really, really fast hoops. Music tastes have changed. Music TV has gotten a resurgence. There's a lot of increase in international music, non-Bollywood music. In fact, Indian artists are touring the world very heavily now more than ever. And Indian consumers are hungrily eating data. We have a great panel today. You know who these panelists are, but I think it's important to know that Farzad represents Viacom. Viacom runs a cluster of channels, including MTV and VH1, and they've been really instrumental in helping develop and support the Indian music industry. There's Tarsim Mittal, who runs one of India's premier artist management companies. Some of the biggest artists in India are represented by him. There's Matt Timmerman from Savan, India's largest streaming service. And there's Helena Kosinski from Nielsen, who probably brings a very unique consumer-led perspective, because we all the time talk about trade perspectives, but I think this is important to learn about what consumers in India really, really want. Strangely enough, Matt and Helena are actually Indians, but they're in disguise today, sitting over there. Right? Okay, so let's start where it all begins. I told you I would say that.
It's fantastic.
So, Helena, can you share with us an overall view of what kind of music Indian consumers listen to, where they listen to, and some tidbits from your research that you just conducted in India?
Yes, thank you. Is this on? Cool. So, hello everyone. Nielsen, for those of you not aware, is a big global market research company. And within our music division, we run consumer surveys, which we call the Music 360, because they look across all areas where the consumer interacts with music, brands, live, streaming, whatever. And in June and July of this year, we ran a study in India, and which is obviously an enormous market, not really one country, many countries all put together, as I'm very aware. And we surveyed online consumers. So just to be very clear, all the numbers that I'm going to put across are not representative of the overall Indian music population, nationally representative.
Is that
but
because all the data points may be different?
Maybe so, but are of the online socioeconomic AB segments only. But that aside, what we learned was very, very interesting. And so to start off with, the Indian music consumer listens to around 20 hours of music a week. Now, that compared to the US music consumer, because we do this study in multiple countries, is less. So the US music consumer on average 32 hours a week, but very different in terms of how they consume music. So in America, a lot of radio, whilst in India, 21% of that time is spent streaming videos. So most popular is streaming videos on services like YouTube, which is the #1 streaming service in terms of usage. Then streaming music through audio services. So very streaming-led an Indian market. Then, and I'm sure Matt will tell us more about. Then listening to music via a digital music library, so listening to music that you already own. Watching music videos on television channels. So that comes next with 15% of time. And then after that, listening to radio. So they're the top 5 music consumption methods in India.
Can you share with us something about the genres of listenership? Whether it's international, local?
Yes. No, that's fine. So when it comes to genre, as everyone knows, Bollywood and film music is a huge part of Indian culture. And that is when we ask people, what genre of music do you listen to? What type of music do you listen to most often or occasionally? Then film and Bollywood comes top. But after that, it's other Indian genres, Indian pop music, regional Indian folk music, but then Western music. So what we're seeing is that Western pop is popular, Western rock, R&B, and dance music. So they would, in that order, are the most popular Western music genres. And that on a weekly basis, 50% of those online consumers report listening to artists from North America. So definitely seeing, and again, that skews younger. So the younger you are, the more likely you are to listen to Western music, to music from around the rest of the world. But yes.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of time on panels, a lot of managers or labels or artists ask, I'm an Australian artist, and do people listen to Australian music? But I think India's got such a large English-speaking population. In fact, the world's largest English-selling newspaper is out of India. And pretty much everyone, English is almost like a second language. And I think it's important to know that it's not Australian music, it's not British music, it's not Canadian, but it's music that comes in. But I think this statistic is really important, that it's North American music, because typically you would always have the US, UK top 40s. There's always classic music, like Helena said, and there's dance music, which is in electronica. So India's got a massive, massive electronica EDM boom going on at the moment. Yeah. So.
Yep. Yes. What else would you like to know, Mandar?
We'd love to know about which social media platforms are favored for music content and usage across platforms.
Okay, so again, this study was of online consumers. So 98% of them said that they use social media. So I'm not quite sure what those 2% are doing, but yes. And of that, to kind of generally, not just related to music, WhatsApp.
Piracy.
WhatsApp is the most popular streaming, the most popular social network in India. Again, that's not a surprise to anyone. But then when it comes to music, interestingly, well, and we asked which social networks do you use to engage with music? And that can be anything. Follow artists, look at touring schedules, and engage with music. And so Musical.ly was the top one, and we surveyed this just before they announced that they were going to be bought by TikTok, and then Facebook, and then Twitter. Just gonna check my numbers. Then Instagram. And then when we look at just the younger demographic, who are obviously even more engaged with social media, although Farzad was just telling me about his 81-year-old mum on Facebook, so maybe not. But when we look at the younger music consumer, Instagram is the most popular for engaging with music and artists.
Fantastic, thank you, Helena. Matt, does that reflect accurately with what you see on Saavn? And can you share with us in brief about Saavn's journey as an independent startup, pretty much starting out of New York, but dominating Indian consumers, their listening habits, and your journey towards your recently concluded M&A transaction with one of the world's leading data operators based out of India?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Mandar. And maybe take a step back to when we really started Saavn and created the platform. We really thought about what was the most important thing to building a streaming service. And it wasn't necessarily about the music to start, which is the most important thing we have, was about data, right? So we really wanted to build a foundation of being a data company so that we could really drive the decisions of how we built the product, how we programmed, how we thought about languages, how we thought about regionalization from a data perspective. So I think we've had some interesting conversations, kind of trading notes over the last couple of days. And we've seen some really interesting trends that have occurred over the last few years. If you were to look kind of back in kind of January of 2014, for example, about 85%, even maybe a little bit more, of our streaming was Hindi content, right? And as Helena mentioned, predominantly India is a pretty unique place where all the music that's being produced is coming from fill-based content, right? If you were to kind of zoom the lens in a little bit and start thinking about when Helena talked about regionalization, that's when things start to change, right? Because if on a macro level you can say, okay, it's 85% Hindi and then Tamil, Telugu, and then English is kind of a single-digit percentage. When I say English, it's international content. But if you start to look at certain parts, let's say you look in the north in Punjabi, you're going to see in Punjab, you're going to see Punjabi content have a larger market share, then followed by other regional languages and then English. If you go to the south, you'd see Tamil, Telugu music having a larger market share. And what's happened over the last few years, and then really the last maybe 24 months, 12 months, is platforms have really started focusing on international content. So you're seeing programming is changing, as Mandar mentioned. Electronic music is huge. So for us, we've actually seen now about 55% or so at a macro level of content is Hindi-based. And then English is now making up 20, 25%, right? So that's something that is really, I think, unique. The Saavn journey, I think, as Mandar mentioned, we actually concluded a transaction, and now I guess we're kind of family now, being owned by similar people.
I didn't realize that. Is that why you sat next to each other?
That's right. We have to stay close. Yeah.
Talk about being an independent and have a startup. I mean, they're both owned by the same corporate parent.
So 51 and 80, but you know,
Stop it.
But what we noticed actually was that 86% of data coming through our service was actually on the Jio network. And for people not familiar with Jio in the room, they started about 2 years ago with 0 users. They've got 240 million monthly subscribers today. From a telco perspective, they added 14 million last month. They have massive aspirations, so I think pretty soon they will be the largest in India. Another interesting stat is about 24% of the world's video streaming actually goes through their pipeline. And so for us, when we were thinking about, as a startup company, raising institutional funding, you can't control the growth of the Indian market, right? We can control kind of our spends, and we can control how we're building the business. But to really kind of grow in that market, you need a local partner, right? You've got, YouTube, for example, which is probably one of the biggest areas of which how people consume content in the country. There's no question about it, and probably the largest. And so in order to really be competitive, and that's the thing, right? India is a very different market than China. India is an open market, right? You can be, Google's there, Facebook is there. And so for us to really continue to accelerate, it was really important for us to find a strategic partner like Reliance.
Right. Thanks, Matt. Farzad, on the TV side, and this is really interesting, folks, because across the world there's this whole thing about the internet and traditional media not growing at the same pace. But I think, like Matt mentioned, India is a very, very different place, unique in its own, strange in its own way. But it's one of the places where television has had, and particularly music television, has had a resurgence of sorts. TV is doing well, and Farzad has been instrumental in running MTV, VH1, and there's also a channel called Colors on the English language side where they do a lot of music programming. So can you share with us broadly where do you see TV positioned within this whole resurgence from your perspective?
No, I think there's a couple of things I get asked a lot of times is, digital's growing, how does it impact TV? But I think it's a very sort of a commonsensical answer to that. I think when I look back at my life, I didn't have the option of carrying around a television set in the local train on the way to college, right? And even if I was dying to listen to a particular track that MTV had popularized back then when I didn't work for them, that was, where do I really consume it, right? Then came the iPod, and then came everything else, which is, the way I look at it is, there's linear and there's on demand, right? The good part is, I think for the industry as a whole, and I remember reading one of your articles, Mandar, that,
Oops.
yeah, I don't know
Don't
whether
remind me
it
what
was factually correct or incorrect, but
I don't remember whatever I said. That's a disclaimer.
no, it's a good thing you said. No, so effectively what's really happened is the overall consumption of music has skyrocketed in the country. One, because you now have multiple avenues to consume, right? Where you could not simply carry around the television set. So that's great for the consumer. You have now various spaces where data has become extremely inexpensive, largely thanks to Geo.
Free, you mean?
No, you're still paying for it. You may think it's free, but you're paying for it. But it's extremely competitive now, and you'll see that keep growing as we go along. And the country is set for serious amounts of video growth, even from the levels that I think videos gone up about 4 times in the last 2 odd years, it's just crazy amounts, right? On television specifically, what we've seen is, and there are a couple of reasons for it, we've seen a 2.5x growth in the last 2 years, which seems quite surprising given that there are so many other avenues to consume music. But I think what's happened is that, and that is unlikely to change in the foreseeable future to my mind, which is that television is still the port of discovery. We popularize, I don't think that's changed, television and radio both actually. We popularize the music, and then once you like something, you continue to stream and learn more. Of course, I'm not saying that television is the only port of discovery, but that's what's really working for us. Because otherwise, for 700, 800 million people to actually go onto the web and sort of find what is really going to work for them to be sort of thrown something that they would like, is very, very difficult. So they come to what is broadcast because it's completely curated for them. They sample, they either like or dislike, and then continue to either stream that music or download and consume for however long. I mean, we've seen it with properties like Coke Studio. We see it with properties like Unplugged. We've seen it with. I mean, there's a reason why music gets broken still on TV and the internet at the same time. The beauty is that you now have another 30 or 35 million households which have been added to the monitoring panel. And that's very, very large numbers. So you've actually seen a lot of rural consumption now, rural and lower urban consumption happening on TV. You have certain television channels which are largely focused on retro, because also keep in mind the way television is consumed in various parts of the country. There's one set of households which leaves music television on and goes about its daily chores. So for that set of audiences, you need to have music which cuts across the entire family, right?
Sure. Yeah.
There's one set that's above, which is consuming just nuclear family, and then there is the singular consumption, which is largely moving towards digital and devices, and but it's strange. There's this recent study that we did at MTV. We do this thing every 2 years called the Youth Marketing Forum, and what we've seen is the cohesive viewing and family time that Indians and Indian youth are asking for has shot up dramatically, which was completely different from what you and I would ever, sort of sit here and think. We think they want to be away from families and so on and so forth. It's actually quite the reverse, and it's in the last 4 years, it's just changed. So it's a good time. It's a good time for television. I think it's the best possible time for the music industry in terms of consumption as a whole. Now comes the time to monetize.
Sure. And can you just, because since we're talking about the mixture between international music and a large part of our audience is probably trying to understand India and what they can do out of India. How do you see the mix in international music versus local music? Is that rising? And what genres particularly work?
So we struggled with, so the way my portfolio is sort of divided is VH1 is completely international music, MTV Beats, which is the music channel, is completely Hindi music. So, we get to see a bit of what's happening across the board. VH1 struggled for the first 5 years, which was 2005 to 2009 odd. And then it just suddenly took off. So we're seeing a lot of growth in international music specifically come from the smaller towns, where the metros are still continuing to grow, but a lot of growth is coming for us from the much smaller towns. It goes across genres. I think Helena covered the genres very correctly. There's, dance is big, there's pop, there's rock, there's classics.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, we did this experiment with K-pop. Yeah, people are loving it.
Yeah, so that's actually on my list. So apparently 52% of Indians often or occasionally listen to K-pop.
There you go.
Yeah, we see that on the Savin platform as well.
Any folks from K-pop companies here? These are the.
Yeah.
There you go. This is.
India's your next big market.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, we're going to move to Tarsem. Tarsem, I think, is a very successful manager. Touring obviously plays a really large part in generating income for your artists. Can you share some statistics with us on the live music touring market and the ability for artists to generate?
Okay, so before I share the statistics, I want to tell you guys that there are more than 50 unique things about the live business in India. I'm going to first tell you 2-3 things so that you have a perspective. Artists don't earn money through anything else. So the labels releases the music, TV, people used to discover, people consume it on streaming, they do all the data, but finally they come to us for the live
That's how it is actually, pretty much anywhere else in the world.
to make money.
What he's saying is he's got the most amount of money.
So first, in India, most of the Indians, whatever money they earn throughout their life, a big chunk of them, they spend on a wedding. Okay, it's a dream thing for anybody. Like if I have a kid, so whatever money I earn, I start saving money to spend on my daughter's wedding for like 10-12 years. The wedding industry is estimated to be about $10 to $15 billion in India. And approximately, there are 3 things which are important: decor, entertainment, and food. So about 15% of that money is spent on entertainment, that is primarily music. So if you see this statistic, you will realize that about $3 to $4 billion entertainment of live music can come from weddings. But this data is not available on public platforms because most of the amount is in cash. It's not counted. Okay, they don't spend paying GST on.
Yeah, I think we got that. Yeah. Let's move on.
So that's one. B, there are unique states like Assam, which is my hometown, and there is a festival called Bihu, and the entire state for 1.5 months does live concerts throughout the state. So if I give you a number, there would be minimum 2,000 concerts happening in 1 month, in the month of April and May in Assam. These are all live music. State like Punjab, okay, you will have melas, like long, big fairs, which will run for 7 days, 10 days, and primarily it is live music getting played. And there are a lot of places like that. West Bengal, the thing which you would like to do if you are happy is to do a concert. So whether there is a Saraswati Puja, or Durga Puja, Diwali, Holi, whatever you want to do, you just celebrate it with live performances. And then the last thing, like politicians, we are full of politicians in India. Okay.
So is the music industry, actually.
Yeah. So one of the biggest revenue, you'll be surprised, one of the biggest revenue which comes to us, if you are a politician in a village. So what you would do, you would organize a concert, get the biggest artist to perform, organize the concert for free in your constituency, and there'll be 100,000 people coming, do a festival. So ticketed concerts, which is primarily the dream of any artist to go to the live concert, only constitutes not more than 8 to 10% of the total revenue of what we do from live. So from the top, the total industry would be approximately 6 billion. Again, I'm saying there is no data available official anywhere. These are all estimates. It would be about 6 to 7 billion. It would top, the first thing is private events. Private events would cover weddings, birthdays, anniversary, and I have a lot of money, I'm happy, I want to do an event. There is no occasion. Okay, that's the top. Second is corporate events. Every corporate, they would do a dealer meet, announce a product launch, announce a new scheme for the dealers. MTV had done really great this year. They are throwing a party for the entire team. There's a performance. I mean, you spend.
This is true.
Yeah. So all of us, those corporate events is two. Then the government events, like there are more than 15 states which has official about 6 to 7 festivals. Tourism department, this department, the other department, who would do a 5-day festival in the state, and they would invite artists. Then you have educational institutes. Every educational institute, there are about 5,000 minimum in India. Every college, every school will have a yearly festival, will be a 3-4 days festival, and music plays one of the biggest role there. Then you have events which are organized by clubs. So every city, every village, every town has associations of Lions Club, Leo Club, Rotary Club, some other clubs. There are hundreds of these associations. They would like to do a charity event. They would like to do an event just for the fun of it. Those kind of events. And then finally comes the ticketed concerts at the end. So we are not used to pay for tickets that much.
So I think what Tarsim is saying is that the typical impresario sort of system of presenting concerts or an organized concert industry is actually preset by a lot of events rather than concerts, which is why you'll find the word events popping up in India a lot more than the word concert popping up. We've got a little paucity of time. I saw Tony floating around looking into my eye, which basically means, I just want to quickly touch upon, and Matt, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about Savan Originals. There's been lately a huge rise, like in international music, but there's also been a lot going on in the local independent music scene. And what is important is to note that it's not necessarily record labels themselves that are just breaking the artists. I mean, you guys had some success, right? And I think Farzad would have had some success in helping support that or break artists. Can you sort of very quickly touch upon that so then we can go to Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've created Artist Originals, which essentially was giving a platform for artists to actually be able to have, number one, have access to tens of millions of users around the country. But not only would they come onto our platform, we would then give them distribution, whether it be through the Orchard or Believe, to get their content on every other platform. So that'd be Spotify, that'd be YouTube, that would be iTunes. One song in particular was a song called Bom Diggy. It was the #1 on BBC Top Asia, #1 on iTunes. We had over 80 million streams of the content. And that was one of our first tracks. We're working with many different artists, and we're doing a lot of cross collaborations as well with US, Canadian artists, Australian artists, and really focusing on giving people a platform to really be able to know that it doesn't have to just be film-based content, right? Real quick, and this is a real quick tidbit, I was recently in the Derby slums a weekend ago. And for those who know, it's the second largest kind of slums in Asia, where you have about 1 million people live in 1 square mile. And there's something called the Derby Project, which I think Universal Music and others are working with. And it's incredible to see these kids that come from absolutely nothing with these aspirations of being hip-hop stars, right? And they're beatboxing and they're dancing, and it's just so incredible to see the aspiration of artists. And this is at a in such a kind of poor part of the country. But then you think about the talent that really exists across the country and finally giving them a platform. So we've had a lot of success and are really excited about what we're doing. But again, it's not just something that's exclusive to our platform. We want to make sure that artists that can come into our system can also have access to all the global platforms that are there. And then also keeping the balance, because our content partners and labels are one of the most important parts of our business as well. So there's a balance between the two.
Sure, right, thanks. And Farzad, a quick example of anything that you helped.
Yeah, so
create
so
or build.
we started the country's first hunt for an international or English singer
Right.
in 2015 called The Stage, and we had moderate expectations from it, given that we're a Bollywood country, but we saw phenomenal success with what it did. I mean, it just it broke through everywhere, and the next year we had thousands of people lining up for auditions, which told us that there is a really large opportunity for us to potentially have an artist that can break through internationally. It would be much simpler in the current scenario for an English language artist from India to break through at the scale that you would need,
Understood.
right? Because
Yeah.
of the language. So we've seen that do very well, and that's actually buoyed us on now, and like Matt said, to really set up something which is completely non-film. And we're working towards setting up what will probably be the largest non-film platform for music artists as we go along.
Right.
Because that space is really where, for anyone who wants to, is looking to enter India in any form, non-film is really where it needs to be at.
Right, fantastic. Look, just in so you want to add
No,
something?
I was just going to say, I'm not sure I agree with your. It has to be in English. I think it, to a degree, it does help internationally if a song is in English. But I think the rise of K-pop and the success of BTS in the US,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is an album that isn't even in English, shows that actually maybe an Indian language hit.
I
could be a global
don't
hit.
disagree with you there at all. We may make strides because the music is good.
Yep.
It was just largely from a probability and a universe sample kind of, which you would understand,
Yeah.
point of view, which is that if we have 4 billion people who speak English across the world, the chances of a track becoming popular
Yeah.
in the English language may be higher.
Right.
That's true.
Great.
But
We
yeah.
can take this offline over a drink and then we can fight over it. So quickly, in summation, this really is about the new India story. Video up, consumption up, data up. There's a whole lot of non-traditional music apart from Bollywood. I think the consumption of international music has gone up, as you can see on television, streaming, obviously like anywhere else. I think the live business is really booming, and I think that's really the first port of call or first port of entry anywhere that comes in. I'm getting some serious signs from various people to shadow. We have time for one question, after which you guys can talk to the panelists off stage. So, yeah.
I just wanted to check with you guys, with all the streaming platforms coming in and now Jio becoming free and all data costs really low, especially for you, how much has, what's the change in piracy? Growing up in India, it was all about torrents to me, and now of course I'm earning, so I buy my records, but how much has piracy been affected now?
Can I actually just quickly start with the question so that we can move to actually one of the topics of the question that may be sort of relevant. Piracy broadly like anywhere else, and I don't think anyone's been able to 100% eradicate it. But I think, from an industry perspective, from an Indian music industry perspective, I think the piracy, for someone to not have a motivation for piracy, you need to have something else that they can go to. And that is, today the proliferation of data, the proliferation of the streaming services, the ability for artists to break has actually had a very significant shift in usage pattern from doing a P2P piracy sort of situation to actually just coming on and paying an $80. I mean, Netflix is at a 600 rupee subscription level, whereas what you actually pay if someone had a subscription. And in fact, a large part of the business is actually free on-demand listening. And if you look at the option that provides to somebody young, somebody who's a millennial or centennial or whatever you call it, is actually very high for piracy not to actually get into there. So there is a significant shift. Without doubt, there is a reduction. And the one statement that I want to make is that a lot of piracy actually comes from outside of India, from some of the other South Asian countries where the portals lie, which are similar to Savan, except that they're non-legal portal. Hope that sort of broadly comes in. I know we have a paucity of time, so I'm just gonna. How are we doing on time? One more question, or should we wrap it up? Okay. So, sorry, who's that? Tony? Okay, one more question. Okay, that's a wrap. Thank you. A big, big hand for the panelists.